Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Charmed. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Harry ends up trying to get in contact with his Dark Lighter, but something's in the way, and he kind of feels, okay, his Dark Lighter's in danger. And obviously, the Charmed ones are having no luck in resurrecting the power of three. Interestingly enough, now we're seeing it again, it does seem like Macy she still has her telekinesis, which I think is weird. Because before I wasn't sure whether it was straight up still telekinesis or whether it was more like a wind power. It seems like it's more straight up it's still her telekinesis, what I think is fascinating considering the fact is Mel and Maggie got completely different abilities from the original abilities. For her to still have hers intact, I think that's kind of interesting. Maybe that's going to turn into something. Maybe not. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of fascinating. Obviously, it's just getting used to them again. So the fact that she kind of ended up pulling more stuff than she meant to, I think kind of shows that obviously maybe it's different in the sense that her telekinetic power is grown even stronger. Maybe that's kind of what it's insinuating. Regardless, but now. They all split up, all dealing with different things throughout the episode, trying to, deal with different things. So let's start off with Harry and Mel. Harry and Mel are trying to track down the Dark Lighter. They're going to the different places they know where to look for the Dark Lighter, and they go to the facility where all the magical creatures were held. And basically, they find, obviously, some dead magical creatures, in this vat of stuff. And basically using the spell, they're able to recreate it, and it seemed like there was a legitimate shadow monster. When Mel was like, "What is that?" and I was like, "Shadow monster," which immediately when I think shadow monster, I literally think of Lost. But I was like, "Oh, that was interesting." But then it was like, the fact is, it wasn't, because Harry's like, that's not just any magical creature, because literally no magical creature has all the abilities. It has to shapeshift, turn into shadow, and also spit acid. But then Harry pieces it together, the creatures they found, the three dead creatures, it's like, that creature was an amalgamation of all their abilities. So it's like, at first they're thinking if someone, maybe they put it in someone as a host, and they start thinking Harry's Dark Lighter, which I think, if it was Harry's Dark Lighter, I feel like it would have affected Harry in some shape or form. In a sense of anything happens to his Dark Lighter, I feel like it would have happened to him. So he would have felt change. He wouldn't have necessarily been himself. I skipped over it a little bit, but I should also talk about what Harry was trying, because obviously Harry's worried, because he knows, if something happens to his Dark Lighter, he dies too. And obviously everyone's worried about it. That's why they're trying to, remedy this situation. Hence why, at first, Maggie and Macy are working on a means of trying to separate Harry from his Dark Lighter. That way, if anything happens to the other, if something happens to his Dark Lighter, they don't have to worry about it happening to Harry. But Harry is kind of just in case he doesn't get the chance, he's telling Mel, hey, you are the born leader for this situation. You're too critical of yourself. You're harder on yourself than anybody else. You kind of don't, any mistakes you made, you kind of hold that against you. Don't do that. You are doing a good job as a leader. Tell Maggie to kind of believe in her powers, that there's more that she's capable of than she thinks or knows, but before he could get to Macy, Mel was like, you tell her yourself, whatever it is, because you're going to be fine. So, but basically, they end up tracking the cell phone number from that burner, and then finding a facility, and it turns out it was what Harry had seen in a mindscape. And going deeper inside, as they're trying to free what they believe to be the Dark Lighter, Harry ends up kind of finding it, because I think the close proximity just kind of acts as an alarm, and it kind of lets him know but then it's wait, if he's here, what's in there? So, but by the time he tells Mel, she's already kind of melted her way through the door, and the creature ends up escaping. Because the moment they were it needs a host, at first I was I immediately thought, the guy they resurrected, but then they threw out the Dark Lighter. I was but in retrospect, I was saying, if it was a Dark Lighter, I felt like something would have happened to Harry if that was the case. But regardless, maybe it wouldn't have worked like that anyway. Just because they are connected doesn't mean that maybe something like that. But I feel like that much power kind of being pushed into a Dark Lighter, I feel like it would have had effect. It would have broken Harry in some shape or form. It would have done something to him. But luckily, that creature started crushing the bottle, and it was starting to hurt Harry. And Mel was kind of using her powers to kind of keep it at bay, but long enough for to kind of. It's not clear whether her powers ended up kind of killing it, or maybe like it being active for so long ended up draining it. Because when they go and check, it is the dead body that they resurrected. But it's like, did the energy from the creature dissipate? Because like it might be a thing of like, obviously this is still trial and error, so it's probably a situation of maybe like once a creature pushes itself for too long, it uses up all the energy, and it's too much taxing on the body, especially considering a dead body. So it's like, okay, so if they're resurrecting people to infuse them with magical creatures, why? We'll go ahead and talk about it, because we got that interesting twist, which someone else had already suggested, that basically Julian's aunt was behind this company and stuff like that. My worry was wondering whether or not Julian was kind of a plant or something, in the sense that like maybe he was kind of connected to all this. It seems like this is just stuff isolated with his aunt, which that's definitely going to lead to a complicated situation between him and Macy. Unless we end up finding out, well, it will get even more complicated if it turns out that Julian is a part of it too. I think his aunt might just be the one that's a part of it. Maybe she's trying to eventually bring Julian into the fold or something like that. Because in the retrospect, because basically her thing at the end was like, hey, like this world is in danger because of magic. And it's kind of what I thought it was, in the sense, like I thought they were getting magic because they wanted to give magic to themselves so they could fight back against the magical creatures. It kind of seems like it's necessarily in that way. Basically, they think magic is evil. It's like, oh, it's ruining so much of the world. So they're using magic to fight magic. So they're literally basically creating super soldiers, to basically fight against. But I'm wondering, are they only using dead people at first as test subjects just because you don't have to worry about killing someone to do it, but then eventually taking live people to become the army? Or was the whole plan always to use dead people? That way. I'm curious to see which way they end up going with that. But my mind immediately goes, remember they set up the whole thing about why Julian's family dying in that accident and everything, and I'm like, it was a magical creature that killed his parents, wasn't it? So that's probably going to be the motivation to either be why Julian is a part of this, or maybe that's going to be part of the motivation of why he ends up joining this, which that could lead to a complicated thing, because it's like, wait, you're magic too, Macy, and that could turn deadly. Maybe not, we'll see. It might be a situation that his aunt was already a part of this thing, and then she found out, maybe she was already kind of like, hunting down the magical world. Maybe her sibling, whether it be Julian's dad or mom, because I don't remember whose sibling she is, but maybe whoever they were, maybe it kind of ran in your family, or maybe her parent, maybe Julian's parents' death is what set her down his path. It's going to be interesting to dive into that, but I think that was definitely a motivating factor in all of this. Whether it was the precursor to all of this, or whether it was just a small part, or a big yet small part of like, maybe this was already in place and Julian's parents' death just set her further down his path. That's definitely going to be the interesting aspect to see where that kind of, goes in that regard. Another angle to this episode is the whole situation. Well, since we're talking about it, is Macy obviously trying to figure out how to, separate Harry from his Dark Lighter. They come across a spell that seems like it's basically how the elders ended up wiping the White Lighter's memories. But they're like, maybe they could apply it, but the problem is it takes to power 3, which is where Maggie's heading in this side of her side of things, which we'll get to soon enough. But obviously, Macy's trying over and over again to find a way around this, but unsuccessful. Which that's what I love about Macy. She adds it, and I talked about this in season 1, which is so interesting. She adds a science element to, like, she approaches magic also adding in a science aspect to it, which I think is so interesting. Because it's like in the Magicians, like, magic, it's such a weird thing. I've never seen any other mythology kind of use magic in that regard, where it's like it's there's literal math and science to performing magic. Like, the Magicians is kind of owned in its own right, and Macy kind of adds that to this series, because that was never a thing in the obviously portions and stuff like that, but it was never like as scientific as like Macy approaches it. So I think she adds a very interesting element to this series in that regard. That's something that wasn't there in the original series, but every attempt doesn't work, and Julian wants to kind of spend time with her, but she's kind of avoiding him. But she actually kind of gets his help with this whole situation. Granted, she has to kind of lie about the ins and outs of it, but it's kind of like, yeah, so what if you talk about, she tries to talk about it in a more theoretical sense and tries to ground it in science without going too deep into the actual situation. She does explain that this is about her sick friend and everything. And I even love that because she's like, "Yeah, I'm running this experiment." He's like, "Egg experiment," and she looks down and she looks at him, and he's like, "It's right there. I had to go for it." I was like, "I love it." Hey, I'm a sucker for a good pun. I know people don't like puns. I appreciate a good pun. Whether you think that was a good pun or not, I don't care. I enjoyed it. I was like, eggs. I got it. Look at you. It was corny, and I'm one of those. I'm a corny dude, so I love corny stuff. So it was right up my alley. But the fact of the matter is, and the same, because obviously that was something Maggie had brought up this episode. Not the corny aspect, but the whole aspect of. What does Macy want when it comes to this whole Harry thing? Because for her, it's like she didn't know where Harry stood, and it's like, where do you stand? And that's the thing, and that's something I brought up before. I thought that was what was really blocking Macy, was the fact that she was kind of torn between what she wanted. She hadn't really 100% decided, so that's what I thought was kind of interesting. But the fact of the matter is, spending time with Julian, because he's offering her a job, and it's like, oh, she's like, I'll be working for you, and he's like, no, working with me, which is interesting, because obviously for Macy, she ended up having to leave the dream job she had set up ahead of time. So kind of being back in that sciencey field probably feels good. It's a tempting offer, but because of everything that's going on, it's that whole thing of like being a charmed one, kind of basically having to put every aspect of your life on hold, especially this whole love life situation. Obviously that's like, oh, because the whole thing came up last time. I was like, no, we deserve, happiness and everything, but it's still that complicated thing of balancing it all. It's just, the complicated situation of being a charmed one, being a part of, this magical world. But the fact is, sharing that dessert and everything is actually what, actually set it off in Macy's mind about how she can approach this whole situation with Harry. Instead of separating them, because she doesn't think it's possible, bring them back together. And she brings this option up to Harry, and I thought was interesting, because Harry's like, oh, rather than someone else being in control, I could be in control. But then Macy was like, I don't know who would be in control. But for Harry, he likes the thought of it, because he never thought it'd be possible for him to be whole again. He wouldn't even know what that would be like. But that's the complicated thing. Let's not forget, Harry kind of saw what kind of man that he was as Jimmy. He sees what kind of being, even with he as he is now, like he's all good and everything. But the moment you add Jimmy into the fold, you add a little bit of darkness back to him, so he becomes very complicated. Which that could stack layers upon layers, because let's not forget, like when he was Jimmy, he had an affair. He cheated on his wife and kind of abandoned his family to a certain, so it's like, he wasn't the best person, but obviously, like, coming to that realization, like, to be fair, no one's perfect. So, but that's always the thing of, like, this is the Harry they've come to know. Like, what's going to happen when Harry gets a little bit of darkness back in him? Like, what's that going to be? It's interesting because Macy kind of had that, formula to her. She was part light, she was part darkness, but that's no longer a thing because her demon side is gone. But lo and behold, who's still got a witch side and a demon side who's still kind of good and bad, and it's like Abigail. So it's like when this comes down to it, it might be a Harry and her, especially because it's like, he's like, I just want to kind of basically, he basically friend zones Macy. He's like, how do I get my friend back? And she's like, you just did, and hugs him. And so now it kind of solidifies the path that they're going down. Her being with Julian, which, once again, that could get complicated. Him going down the path of potentially being with Abigail, which, that's super complicated. She's definitely got her own ambitions and stuff like that. But it's like, I think Harry's only going down that route because because neither one of them is, because Harry kind of made it clear, like, how he feels about Macy before, but it's just, they haven't been clear cut about it. And now it's like, they're kind of in this limbo area. Now she's kind of thinking like, well, I'll be with Julian because Harry doesn't feel that way. I think she was if Harry had told her in that moment, I love you, she would have left Julian in an instant. I think it's that situation of like, that's where her heart lies, but it's just kind of, just their relationship is complicated, and neither one of them is speaking from the heart right now, I think. Because I don't think that's how, I think Harry's just putting his heart on pause just because it's like, he sees what, he doesn't want, just much like Macy not wanting to tell Maggie about Parker because of the whole Jordan thing, and like, you're happy and everything, whether there is a Jordan, that whole day. But I think it's kind of a similar thing where he just doesn't want to ruin things for Macy. He doesn't want to complicate things. So that's where that situation stands. So there's that. And then there's Maggie sneaking into trying to sneak into Abigail's place to kind of snoop around for the knife, because she's thinking when Abigail took Macy's demon side. She took a little something else to something connected to the power of three, making it so that maybe even blocking it some shape or form. But ends up bringing Jordan along because initially she's kind of avoiding. There's actually kind of this little tidbit they kind of set up where it's like, oh, like the Wiccan shop is open again because Catherine was always, I guess the whole point was, get Mel to find someone else to take over, which begs the question. I know Catherine's got to return in some shape or form at some point, just because of her being connected to this world. She's got obviously stuff to figure out, which that's complicated because obviously Mel is already with Ruby, so maybe that's an angle they won't ever go down. Which now it gets you paranoid because you're like, well, everyone in their lives in particular is like, well, could there be more with Ruby? Because I wonder because now I'm sitting here thinking about, I wonder, does Julian's mom know that they are the charmed ones? I don't, the fact that, I don't know. Because, Nadia did meet, Mel, but it was kind of further away, but I don't know if they pieced that necessarily together. So, oh, these witches, they probably think they're witches. I think they're that organization is well versed enough in the supernatural world. So I don't think they probably know they're witches, but maybe they don't know about the charm ones, or maybe they just know about Mel. Maybe they don't know about necessarily, because they weren't able to get Mel's name. So they probably don't know the connection of that's Ray's daughter, and that's also and Ray's daughter has two other sisters. Well, it's Macy and Maggie. So maybe not. We'll kind of have to go down that route, but nevertheless, circling back, Maggie didn't want to involve Jordan because every time he gets involved, he almost dies. She's like, but he's like, no, I got to balance the scales and, whatever you need, I'm here to help. And she's like, are you ever a jerk? He's like, yeah, when someone steals my first aid or punches me in the face. So he's like, basically where things stand, the only person that I'm cool with basically is your sister Mel. It's like, she's the only one that's kind of, still good and cool. And it's like, Maggie's like, oh, we'll see how long that lasts, which you would almost think just because of just Mel's personality and everything, you would just think that it'd be like, oh, it's just funny how things would work out because it's just Mel is the more if anyone, you would think Mel would have been the one that ended up punching him in the face. It just fits Mel's personality more, Granted, it's different circumstances, but that just seems like a Mel move, So you would expect him to actually kind of be more okay with Macy under those circumstances. So, but it's it's a thing of yeah, don't worry, my sister's going to do something eventually that you'd be like, yeah, So I just thought that was neat. But she ends up bringing him along, and obviously it's she's there with Abigail. They're using his curse as an excuse, and she's getting all flirty with him. I'm like, are you literally trying to get with I was like, wow. Look, I know you. I thought that was interesting because I was like, you are very flirtatious because it's well, first it's Harry, now Jordan. I'm like, yo, if you float that way, you probably be trying to. I was like, are you trying to? Would you end up trying to steal Mel's girlfriend or something like that right now? The circumstance. I just thought that was interesting. I was like, huh. But it didn't. It's in a grand scheme of things, it's because she knew they were kind of full of. She knew that they were being truthful about it, but at the same time, it's oh, I know you're hiding the real reason why you're here. I thought it was interesting. She ends up kind of giving him a book and saying basically there's plenty of witches that are kind of being hunted down by demons. It's there's only so much she can do because if she sticks up too much for the witches, she looks weak and it kind of causes a complication with the demons and stuff like that. So she's giving the job to Julian, which I think is going to be interesting, that basically he ends up helping out witches. I wonder, is that going to be something he solely does, or is it probably going to be a project between him and Maggie? It'd be interesting to see what that ends up being, especially because it makes sense, for the lives of the witches that were lost because of his family, for him to end up saving witches' lives. That makes sense in the grand scheme of things. So there's that. But obviously there's a whole complicated thing. Even Macy was like, are you really making this excuse to go to Abigail's place really looking for the knife, or is this to see Parker? Which Maggie's like, it's not about Parker. And lo and behold, the weapon she's looking for, of course, it's in a dungeon where Parker is. And she's trying to look for the knife, and Parker's like, Vera. And so that's a whole complicated thing. And I like that moment between, he's like, I'm trying to explain to you, it wasn't me. She's like, it was you. It might have not fully been you, but it was a little bit of you. It was that part. There was a part of you that gave into that. And yeah, it was the apples, but the apples only amplified what was already there inside of you. And I think that kind of hit hard for, Parker, because for her, it's she's kind of through with that whole thing. And for him to see that and kind of hear that from her means that he's through. He's just let me help. And she's like, I'm looking for the ritual knife, gets it. Because even it was interesting because even Abigail didn't even think of that because at first she's like, oh, she brought her new lover to help her old lover, and then Jordan was like, wait, Parker's alive, and then she's like, wait, what? So like she knew that, like, so you didn't know, so she still thought at the end because she ends up showing up in time, and she thinks like, oh, I know what your plan is, to use this dagger to strip Parker of all of his demon powers, and then you can walk away happily ever after. But it was like, Maggie's like, wait, what? No? Because even Jordan was like, wait, is that what's really this whole thing was about? And even the neat thing about Parker being like, come on, Abigail, just let them go. But then, like, Abigail finds out, like, what they're really about. It's like, oh, I didn't do anything to steal the power of 3. If anything, it's your own, like, I guess the whole sister, there's a mishap in your own sisterhood relationship. So that's kind of on you. So leaving the knife to Maggie and telling them to kind of get out, and even Parker before they left is like, Jordan, take care of her. And Jordan's like, she can take care of herself. And it's a sad thing because you can tell Parker does still care about her regardless of all that, and it's just now it's kind of like it's complicated. It's like, because it's something, because like Jordan was like, she's like, I'm sorry about the whole I should have told you Parker was alive thing, but obviously if they know that, it could jeopardize their relationship with Abigail, which could, because if it slips out that he's still alive, it will jeopardize her position. So that's the whole thing. But and they need her to be in her good graces to kind of keep the balance and everything between the witches and demons, at least keep things on a more positive scale. But Jordan was like, no, I'm not even worried about that. It's like, you've seen Parker again and everything. And it's like, for her, it's like, at least when she thought he was dead, there was closure. But now Jordan's like, that wound's open again, So I thought that was interesting because even Jordan had said, like, earlier in the episode, he was like, I know, like, we had a moment, and it's like, yeah, I get it. He's like, it's cool, I'm cool, so you don't have to kind of worry about it. But I am curious because it's like I said, it seems like everyone's kind of shifting in their particular directions. Obviously, this whole thing between Maggie and Jordan, Macy and Julian, and then potentially Abigail and Harry, and even Mel and Ruby. So it's just kind of like everyone's kind of getting, heading in those directions. I mean, granted, once again, the shakeups are going to be the Macy and Harry situation. I don't think that's, those stories aren't, I don't think that's done. I don't think they're locked down in their respective situations. I think, like I said, those two, like Harry's and his Dark Light are combining. I think that's going to play a role in keeping things the way they are relationship wise, but I think eventually down the road things are going to shift. I'll ultimately kind of have to wait and see in that regard, but I'm curious to kind of see where all this ends up taking us, because it's like, as the Charmed Ones have to figure out like what their situation is going to be, like how they fix this power 3 thing, especially because it's there. It's like, so there's like must be some underlining issue, because the whole point was like basically they're going to have to go on their own journeys, and those journeys are going to eventually lead them back to being charmed. So they basically got to, like, it is kind of what I was thinking with the whole reason why Macy couldn't get her powers back yet, because like she's in the process of trying to figure things out. So it's like once things are kind of like, they have to all go on their own journeys, and I think that's going to lead them, like, I think it's what I kind of brought up before, like Macy's having to figure out her love life situation. I think the same thing for Mel figuring out what she wants and kind of being more confident in her position as a leader. Maybe Maggie trying to figure out what she wants. I think all that is kind of because they have to kind of figure themselves out, because they're down these paths where they're kind of unsure, but once they become solidified in who they are and where they stand in the aspects of their life, I think then they come together fully as sisters again. Like, it's like I said, because the previous Charm one from last episode said they're going to go on their own paths, and then the path to being the Charm Ones, it's kind of its own thing. So, like I said, that's one thought about it. We'll kind of have to wait and see. Is it just that, or is there a little more complexity to it? But I think my thoughts are kind of like around the ballpark of kind of what they'll have to deal with first before they get back to the Power 3. But we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Do note that Charmed is going on a bit of a break. It's pretty much taking a month off and won't be coming back until March 27th. So do keep that in mind. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.